Hello and most welcome to 1718. Sorry. Of the Heidegger series, and today we will start the first episode with Wittgenstein's Moral Thought. It's an article by Edmund Dain. And just let me introductory mention what it is about. The moral thought of Wittgenstein is in context with him saying that there are no such thing as moral propositions. It is very similar to the understanding that an attitude towards doesn't take truth values. So it is not a proposition in disguise. It is rather something much more similar to a moral proposition. It's an attitude towards, and it's in that aspect very similar to intention, attitude towards, and also hoping and belief. There are some dissimilarities, but they all share the very concept of not having within them a moral proposition. It is directed and it's immediate in its fashion. The very immediacy is maybe the most important aspect. The directedness towards the thing. So the possibly paradoxical statement that there are no moral propositions does not undermine the idea, or doesn't undermine there being any morality or ethics. It would even be fair to say that Wittgenstein and his followers would say it is quite the opposite. It's a strengthening of things that otherwise would be referring only to an obscure innerness, a hiddenness. A hiddenness you cannot enter, and therefore in the end morality sort of disappears into the same hiddenness.
имахме speaking и сте го играете с приятели. И една казва, аз нямам приятели, аз съм на английски. I don't have friends.
So propositions do indicate that there is an endless introspective process that could possibly, in the end, if you are extremely lucky, lead to a conclusion when it comes to morality. And I would say also that making morality into some sort of propositional understanding, making it an aspect of epistemology, could actually diminish what morality is, give it a flavor of a technicality. And this technical understanding doesn't help us reaching deep into what morality is. Let me read some lines here from Edmund Dain's article, the first page. By the foremost striking feature of Wittgenstein's morale or ethical thought is his repeated insistence in a number of places throughout his earlier work, including the notebooks, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, and the lecture of ethics, that there can be no such thing in the Tractatus, for instance. Wittgenstein writes simply that there can be no ethical propositions, and since a thought is just a proposition with a sense, according to Wittgenstein in that book, there can therefore also be no ethical thoughts either. Ethics, according to Wittgenstein there, is inexpressible and therefore unthinkable as well. Instead, for the early Wittgenstein, ethics is in certain respect like logic. It does not deal with certain facts within the world. Facts that could themselves be represented in or by particular propositions. So it does not have to have its own subject matter in that sense. It is rather a condition of the world. Ethics and logic are alike. According to the early Wittgenstein, in being transcendental. My aim here is to do three things. First, explain why there can be no ethical propositions for the early Wittgenstein. And so why ethics, in his view, both inexpressible and unthinkable. Second, to explain what the early Wittgenstein's alternative vision of the ethical consists in. And so what he means when he writes that ethics is transcendental. And third, to explain what happens both to the claim that there can be no ethical propositions, and to the accompanying vision of ethics in Wittgenstein's later work, where they seem to many simply to drop out of the picture. So we have a connection here where we can see the moral propositions being close in properties to attitudes towards, or attitude toward, or an even better, an attitude that, as was suggested by Edmund Dain in another article. You just take the attitude. It is not contingent on other things, dependent on looking in, so to speak, into the innerness of yourself. To understand whether it is some sort of facts, engravings in the innerness that would decide what morality could be or what it is for you. So in a way, I would say it is not very hard to see the connection here. Subchapter 2. The inexpressibility of ethics. The claim that ethics is inexpressible occurs in several places throughout Wittgenstein's earlier work. In the Tractatus, for instance, that claim comes as the conclusion of a line of thought that begins just a few remarks earlier at paragraph 6.4. All propositions are of equal value. 6.4.1. The sense of the world must lie outside the world. The world is everything as it is and happens as it does happen. In it there is no value, and if there were, it would be of no value. If there is a value which is of value, it must lie outside all happenings, and being so. For all happening and being so is accidental. It must lie outside the world. Six 6.42. Hence, also there can be no ethical propositions.
Знаєш, чи прийшов, коли
Propositions cannot explain anything higher It is clear that ethics cannot be explained. It is clear that ethics cannot be expressed better. Ethics is transcendental, and also ethics and aesthetics are one. Here Wittgenstein explicitly claims that there can be no ethical propositions nothing ethical according to Wittgenstein can be stated or described or represented by any propositions. Ethics, whatever it might be exactly, cannot be expressed. For Wittgenstein in the Tractatus, however, a thought just is a significant proposition, and so what cannot be expressed by a proposition also cannot be thought. Three point five. The applied thought propositional sign is the thought. For the thought is the significant proposition. the propositional sign in application, that is to say, the significant proposition is the thought, and the thought is the significant proposition. They are one and the same thing. Hence, for Wittgenstein in the Tractatus, if there can be no ethical propositions, there can be no ethical thoughts either. If ethics is inexpressible, then it must be unthinkable as well. There just are, then for the early Wittgenstein, no ethical thought. Instead, Wittgenstein claims ethics is transcendental. Those claims are echoed in Wittgenstein's earlier wartime notebooks. The notebooks 1914 to 1916, of which the Tractatus was composed. There too, Wittgenstein writes, it is clear that ethics cannot be explained, expressed. And again, Wittgenstein also claims here, there, as in the Tractatus, that ethics is transcendental. That is, it does not treat the world, but must instead be a condition of the world, like logic. And I think this is similar with the later Wittgenstein, where you have an attitude towards something that is not contingent, dependent on an innerness, and also the, so to speak, what we openly intend about the world, none of those are actually any sort of propositions. There is an interesting similarities between the earlier Wittgenstein and the later one's thinking. And it's interesting what Edmund Dain brings out here. It's because I think it could be a trapdoor here for some people who, like me, are not smart enough to see through them. Since morality and ethics only seldom is mentioned later on in the works of Wittgenstein, one could fall into the belief that those things no longer are of importance. They don't seem to be epistemologically interesting or empirical. And the saying of Wittgenstein that they are not just part of the world or that they are inexpressible is something that is echoed by some of the analytically inclined philosophers of modern day. But the implications are gravely different. And you can also better now understand why there is no possibility of people being soulless. It is not a proposition, it's not contingent, it's not representing something which could be false or true or anything even vaguely similar to those aspects of reality. Similar views can also be found in Wittgenstein's description of the Tractatus in a letter written in 1919 to a prospective publisher of that book, Ludwig von Ficker. There Wittgenstein claims that the point or the sense of the book, though it may not seem to be so, is ethical. And he explains what he means by that, by distinguishing between two parts of his work. My work, quote here, my work consists of two parts, of the one which is here and of everything which I have not written. And precisely this second part is the important one. For the ethical is delimited from within. As it were from my book, and I am convinced that, strictly speaking, it can only be delimited in this way. In brief, I think all of that which many are babbling today, I have defined in my book by remaining silent about it. And there you have, it is strictly not mentioned because of its nature of being non-contingent. Suggestible, you can also call that, and I'm thinking further now, that it is directly of the world. Looking for a paper clip here. The ethical point of Tractatus here consists in limiting, in its delimitation of the ethical, in its defining sphere of ethics, in its defining the sphere of ethics. But it does that from within. By remaining silent about ethics. And that, Wittgenstein claims, is the only way in which the ethical can be delimited. By contrast, the idea that one could delimit ethics from without leads only to babbling. That is, it leads only to incoherence or nonsense. These ideas connect up with Wittgenstein's remarks on ethics in the Tractatus in the following way. The idea that there can be ethical propositions just is the idea that the ethical can be delimited from the outside. That is the idea that there can be ethical propositions just is the idea that ethics is concerned with a certain specifiable range of facts, and that we can therefore adopt an external perspective upon those facts and represent them by means of certain ethical propositions. Thus, in saying that the only way to delimit ethics is from within, by remaining silent about it, and that everything else leads to babbling. Wittgenstein is then in effect saying precisely what he said in the Tractatus. There can be no ethical propositions. Later in his 1929 lecture on ethics, Wittgenstein returns again to the claim that ethics cannot be expressed. There, Wittgenstein writes that if an omniscient person were to write everything he or she know in a book, that book would contain a complete description of the world. But there would, Wittgenstein continues, be nothing within that book that would constitute an ethical judgment or anything that would logically imply such a judgment It really makes one think, I can imagine. By contrast, a book of ethics, if there really could be such a thing, Wittgenstein says he feels would with an explosion destroy all the other books in the world. Wittgenstein elaborates on that feeling as follows. Our words, used as we use them in science, are vessels capable only of containing and conveying meaning and sense. Natural meaning and sense. Ethics, if it is anything, is supernatural, and our words will only express facts. As a teacup will only hold a teacup full of water, even if I were to pour out a gallon over it. Our words, our propositions, will only express what is natural. What is natural, they will only express contingent facts. But ethics is not a matter of contingent facts at all. It is, if anything, it is, if it is anything, is supernatural, and our words will only express facts. As a teacup will only hold a teacup full of water, even if I were to pour a gallon over it. I think that well worth repeated, and it shows that trying to express morality in our normal vocab will not suffice. It will not exactly do the trick. It would lead us to severe mistakes, and in this mistaken belief is that morality in some sort could be contingent, in the idea of a slow development, or similar attitudes. You can also see it this way. Should morality be expressed at all? Isn't it rather close to something that you do? It is in the contact with others, the outside world, and that can only be decided by your activity. And of course, having even the slightest misconception that moral statements were a fact, they would somehow, I think that would indeed suggest that they were contingent. And there you already have some sort of major problem well developed. And here I still see a lot of similarities between this sort of reasoning in the early writings of Wittgenstein and what later develops in remarks on the philosophy of psychology, Settle, the Brown Book, philosophical investigations, and so forth. It's a development that have differences as well as similarities, and in this case, bringing in the older Wittgenstein, I see how it could be very helpful. It could open up the thinking. It's expressed in different ways from a completely different vantage point. Compare it like this: an attitude towards, an attitude that, or a posture that even have the slightest hint of some sort of contingency, or it should be a proposition, or it has some sort of conditions to it. That does no longer make any sense to me. I start to feel like an absolute misconstrual of what those words, what those things actually are. And of course, in that way, they are inexpressible. Having no part to play in the ordinary scientific language or the language of propositions. So that's a completely different understanding of what is transcendental. And that is not how we usually this is not our usual way of treating these words. It's a new one, and I think it's quite fresh. I think I'd rather round up there and say thank you for listening in have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon or evening, night, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.
Very much.